For over 160 million years, dinosaurs ruled the Earth with absolute dominance. From the towering giants of the Jurassic to the swift predators of the Cretaceous, these ancient reptiles evolved into an astonishing variety of forms. They walked on 2 legs and 4, roamed oceans and skies, and inhabited every continent. Their reign was not only long but incredibly diverse. Some dinosaurs stretched as long as a Boeing 737, while others were no bigger than a pigeon. During this time, the planet itself was alive with change. Continents shifted, mountains rose, forests expanded, and yet, dinosaurs adapted and thrived through it all. From the ferocious Tyrannosaurus rex to the gentle Brachiosaurus, each species carved its place in the ancient food chain. At the top stood the predators, creatures with bone-crushing jaws, sharp claws, and superior hunting instincts. Below them were vast herds of herbivores, some so massive they shook the ground with every step. Their rule spanned 3 geological periods: the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. They survived volcanic upheavals, shifting climates, and massive sea level changes. For most of this time, mammals were nothing more than small, nocturnal scavengers, barely noticeable in the shadow of such giants. To put it in perspective, modern humans have existed for only around 300,000 years. Dinosaurs ruled for more than 500 times that. They were not just a moment in history, they were history, shaping the Earth's ecosystems and biological evolution for millions of generations. It seemed that nothing could threaten their supremacy. But all empires, no matter how long or powerful, must eventually fall. And for the dinosaurs, their final day was approaching fast, from deep in the silent void of space. The Earth of 66 million years ago was a planet in transformation. It was the closing chapter of the Cretaceous period, an era that had lasted nearly 80 million years, making it the longest segment of the Mesozoic era. By this time, the supercontinent Pangaea had broken apart almost completely. Massive landmasses had drifted into the early outlines of the continents we recognize today. North and South America were pulling away from each other, separated by a shallow sea. Africa, Australia, and Greenland had already taken on familiar shapes. Europe and Asia were still forming, fragments of land slowly rising as tectonic forces pushed them upward. Mountain ranges like the Andes, the Mongolian highlands, and the ancient Siberian ridges were beginning to emerge, reshaping the world's geography. As flowering plants spread across the continents, they brought more than beauty, they sparked a quiet revolution. Their arrival transformed ancient forests into vibrant ecosystems filled with color, fragrance, and new sources of nourishment. Where there were flowers, insects followed. Butterflies, bees, and beetles evolved to gather nectar and pollen. In doing so, they unwittingly became nature's first agricultural workers, pollinating millions of plants and ensuring the rise of fruit-bearing vegetation. This explosion of plant life changed the game for herbivorous dinosaurs. Now, they didn't just feed on ferns and conifers, they began to graze on a rich variety of leaves, seeds, and fruits. Entire herds adapted to this new diet, and some species began to evolve new traits: stronger jaws, sharper teeth, and longer digestive tracts to handle the changing menu. But it wasn't just the dinosaurs that benefited. In the shadows and underbrush, small mammals were undergoing their own quiet evolution. These creatures, once confined to a life of hiding, were beginning to diversify. Rodents, insectivores, and primitive primates emerged. Most were tiny, no larger than a rat, and many lived underground or in trees. But they were fast, clever, and incredibly adaptable. Take the saber-toothed squirrel found in ancient Argentina, just 20 centimeters long, with a narrow snout and sharp teeth made for eating insects. Or the massive marmot-like herbivore of Madagascar, with bone crests on its skull and an excellent sense of smell, 3 times larger than modern marmots. And then there was Repenomamus, a predator among early mammals. It weighed up to 14 kilograms and was known to hunt baby dinosaurs. Imagine a furry, low-slung creature, something between a Tasmanian devil and a squat dog, prowling the ancient forests. These mammals were small players in a dinosaur world, but soon they'd inherit the Earth. Dinosaurs weren't just colossal beasts stomping across the land. They came in all sizes, from feathered miniatures to towering titans. Their diversity was staggering. At the smallest end of the scale was Oculudentavis, a bizarre creature whose fossilized skull measured just 14 millimeters. That's about the size of a fingernail. With its delicate beak and tiny body, it was likely no larger than a hummingbird. It flitted through dense foliage, snapping up insects, almost like a living jewel in the Cretaceous skies. But as incredible as the smallest dinosaurs were, nothing inspired awe quite like the giants. Take Alamosaurus, a behemoth that may have been the largest land animal to ever walk the earth. It stretched up to 29 meters in length and weighed over 38 tons. His tail alone reached 12 meters, longer than a school bus. These creatures weren't predators. They were peaceful plant eaters, but their size alone made them nearly untouchable. Imagine watching a herd of Alamosauruses marching across what is now the southern United States, trees parting before them, the ground trembling with every step. These animals needed to eat over a ton of vegetation each day, enough to strip an entire forest in a matter of days. Their lives were defined by slow, relentless movement, always searching for food. And they were far from alone. The Cretaceous period was home to an incredible variety of creatures. Some were covered in armor. Others had towering crests or duckbill-shaped snouts. Many had feathers, not scales. And some dinosaurs, even the fierce predators, were smaller than a house cat. It was a time of extremes, a world where size meant survival or death. And across every continent, in every climate, dinosaurs continued to evolve and thrive, unaware that their world was about to vanish in a single fiery instant. It was a day like any other. 5 hours before impact, Earth was calm. The skies were blue, the forests were green, and the dinosaurs went about their routines, oblivious to the cosmic bullet speeding toward them. In the tropical lowlands of what we now call Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, a herd of Alamosauruses, 50 strong, slowly moved through dense forests. These massive herbivores weighed as much as naval ships and consumed over a ton of plant matter every day. To sustain their size, they were always on the move, stripping trees bare and searching for the next patch of greenery. Unseen by them, high above the planet, a glowing object approached. Elsewhere, in ancient Asia, today's Mongolia and China, a Tarbosaurus, one of the fiercest predators of the time, prowled the floodplains. 14 meters long and built like a living tank, this dinosaur had a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth, some nearly 9 centimeters long. It walked on powerful hind legs, its tiny forearms tipped with claws it used to clutch prey. The Tarbosaurus was focused. It stalked the muddy banks where smaller animals came to drink. It didn't know it, but it was on its final hunt. The earth gave no warning. There were no signs in the wind, no tremors in the ground. Every creature, from the tiniest insect to the largest titan, believed it was just another ordinary day. But 65 million kilometers away, a massive asteroid was already locked onto Earth. It had traveled for millions of years through the silent darkness of space. And now it was just hours away. Above the clouds, it was invisible. Below, life continued in perfect ignorance. But the countdown had begun. 5 hours, and everything would change forever. As the asteroid silently approached, life on Earth went on with brutal intensity. In the forests of North America, a powerful Pachycephalosaurus foraged near the coast. Standing nearly 4.5 meters long and weighing close to 450 kilograms, it was no easy target. Its most distinctive feature was its skull, topped by a dome of solid bone over 25 centimeters thick. This natural battering ram wasn't just for display. These dinosaurs likely engaged in violent headbutting battles for dominance or defense. Though mainly herbivorous, this Pachycephalosaurus was opportunistic. It had sharp, serrated teeth that could handle not just leaves and fruits, but also small amphibians, insects, and maybe even hatchling dinosaurs. Today, it was drawn to the coast by an abundance of nutritious seeds and ammonite shells scattered in tidal pools. To it, this was just another lucky foraging day. Meanwhile, deeper inland, a female Ankylosaurus was leading her 4 hatchlings through the underbrush. With armor plating covering her back and sides, and a massive club-like tail built to crush bone. She looked like something from a nightmare. But she was peaceful, more like a prehistoric tank designed for defense, not offense. Her young stayed close. Their survival depended entirely on her protection. In the distance, the newly formed Rocky Mountains stood tall, casting long shadows over the forest. And far to the north, chaos stirred. A Carnotaurus, fast, horned, and reckless, wandered unknowingly into the territory of a full-grown Tyrannosaurus rex. It was a deadly mistake. While the Carnotaurus could run faster, it didn't notice the apex predator soon enough. The T-Rex had already picked up its scent. Its binocular vision locked on. In a heartbeat, it attacked. While these two titans battled for dominance, above them, death streaked silently through space. Just 2 hours remained. Across the globe, life moved in rhythms as old as time. Dinosaurs grazed, hunted, and protected their young, completely unaware that their world stood on the edge of annihilation. In the humid forests of western North America, the armored Ankylosaurus and her young had found a clearing. The towering trees offered shade, and the undergrowth was lush with edible plants. Her tail, a living mace, swayed with slow, deliberate warning as she stood guard. She wasn't hunting, she wasn't aggressive, but she was ready. That club tail had crushed more than one predator's bones. Her hatchlings, still small and unarmored, explored close by. This forest, so alive, so green, was their nursery. None of them knew it was also their graveyard in waiting. Hundreds of kilometers away, violence unfolded. A Carnotaurus, young and overconfident, had trespassed into the domain of a full-grown T-Rex. By the time it realized its mistake, the predator had already closed in. The T-Rex didn't hesitate. With jaws capable of delivering the strongest bite force in the animal kingdom, it lunged. The fight was brutal and short. The Carnotaurus's horns were no match for the sheer power of the T-Rex. Bones shattered, flesh tore, and in moments the victor stood over its prey. The massive predator began to feast, ripping into muscle, devouring organs. This was nature at its rawest, one creature's survival at the cost of another's life. But while it ate, the sky began to glow. A light appeared on the horizon, faint, flickering, strange. The T-Rex glanced up briefly, but its hunger outweighed its curiosity. The bright object grew larger, hotter, faster. Still no alarm, no stampede, no panic, just nature carrying on, until the moment nature itself would be torn apart. 10 minutes to impact. It started as a distant shimmer, barely noticeable, a flicker in the daylight sky. Then it grew brighter, hotter, faster. A strange, fiery light was approaching Earth at unimaginable speed. The asteroid was nearly 10 kilometers wide and weighed several trillion tons. As it pierced the upper atmosphere, the friction ignited it into a blazing inferno. It glowed brighter than the sun. To any creature looking up, it would have appeared as if the sky itself was on fire. Down below, the Tyrannosaurus rex paused mid-meal, its powerful senses detecting something unnatural. It lifted its blood-stained snout and stared toward the heavens. The light was blinding. Even with its eyes shut, the radiation seared through its eyelids. Heat radiated across the land like the breath of a furnace. The grass ignited. Trees burst into flames without warning. Birds scattered into the air, screeching. Insects fled the burning bark. A second sun had risen, and it was falling fast. But then suddenly silence. The asteroid streaked beyond the horizon, disappearing in a blink. The sky no longer burned, but it glowed. A terrifying orange canvas smeared with smoke and dust. For a brief moment, everything was still again. The T-Rex, confused, blinked. Its vision was scorched, its skin blistered. Yet it had survived the first wave. But this was only the beginning. All across the planet, animals paused. Something was wrong, but they didn't understand. Herds froze in the middle of migration. Predators looked up and sniffed the air. Insects burrowed into the soil. Birds fell silent. A global instinct whispered the same ancient warning. Run, hide, flee. But it was already too late. The rock had made contact. Then it happened. At precisely the northern edge of today's Yucatan Peninsula, the asteroid struck Earth with a force beyond comprehension. The impact unleashed energy equal to 10 billion Hiroshima bombs, all detonated in an instant. The Earth's crust didn't just break, it vaporized. A crater nearly 180 kilometers wide ripped open, deeper than any canyon, wider than any valley. The shockwaves tore through rock, sea, and sky. In one terrifying second, the planet rang like a bell. Everything near ground zero, forests, rivers, entire ecosystems, was instantly annihilated. The Alamosaurus herd grazing nearby didn't even have time to move. One moment they existed, the next ash. The T-Rex, far from the impact but within the deadly radius, was thrown violently backward by the shockwave. Bones cracked, blood vessels burst. Before it could even register what happened, it was already dead. The shockwave traveled outward, circling the Earth multiple times, flattening trees, crumbling cliffs, and skinning animals alive from sheer force alone. Even creatures hundreds of kilometers away were ripped from the ground and hurled into the air like rag dolls. But that was just the beginning. The atmosphere itself caught fire. Air temperatures spiked to thousands of degrees near the blast site. Entire forests ignited. Oceans boiled at the shorelines. The sky, once blue, turned a blazing red, then black. Above, 15 trillion tons of molten rock and debris were launched skyward. Some fragments escaped Earth's gravity, thrown into space. The rest, still burning, began to fall back down. It began to rain fire. House-sized rocks, red-hot and sharp as glass, bombarded the planet. The falling debris set off a global inferno, sparing nothing in its path. The world as dinosaurs knew it was ending, and it ended not in days, but in minutes. The Earth burned. As molten debris rained from the heavens, the skies turned into a fiery storm. Thousands, millions of glowing fragments pelted the surface. Each one carried the heat of a blast furnace. Some were no bigger than pebbles. Others were the size of cars. Together, they formed a global firestorm. Entire forests, lush with life just minutes before, were reduced to smoking craters. Flames stretched for miles, devouring everything in their path. No mountain range, no river, no shelter could offer protection. Even creatures far from the impact zone were scorched alive, caught in a storm they could neither see coming nor escape. In western North America, the Ankylosaurus and her 4 young huddled beneath the trees. But the trees were already catching fire. The air grew thick with smoke, and the temperature soared. The inferno didn't need to reach them directly. The oxygen itself was turning into heat. Within moments, the entire forest erupted. The armored mother, built to survive predators, had no defense against flame. Her club tail, her shielded back, useless now. She and her hatchlings perished where they stood. Elsewhere, glass rain began to fall. Microscopic shards, hot and razor-thin, drifted down from the upper atmosphere like snow. Only the snow cut, burned, and killed. It clung to skin, burrowed into scales, and boiled lakes dry. Animals that hadn't already been vaporized or burned were now bleeding, blistering, and collapsing beneath this deadly rain. But in one rare moment of false hope, a Pachycephalosaurus near the ocean survived the initial onslaught. Fires hadn't reached it. The glass hadn't yet fallen there. It wandered, dazed, toward the shore. But the sea was not safe either, because beneath its calm surface, a monstrous tsunami was rising. The ocean pulled back. At first, the retreat of the tide was eerily silent, unnatural. Fish flopped helplessly on the wet sand. Shells and coral beds lay exposed under the sunless sky. Then, like a monster awakening from the deep, it came. A wall of water, over 100 meters high, roared inland. The asteroid's impact had displaced entire sections of the seafloor. Waves unlike anything the Earth had ever seen raced outward in every direction. This wasn't just a tsunami, it was a planetary flood. In mere minutes, The ocean swallowed the coastline and pushed deep into the heart of the continent. It surged across what would one day become the southern United States, reaching as far as North Dakota. Traces of this monstrous wave are still found there today. Near the shore, the lone Pachycephalosaurus, having survived fire and glass, turned to run, but it was too late. The tsunami lifted it, dragged it into the churning water, and pulled it into the dark depths. And that was only one corner of the disaster. Across the planet, the ground itself began to shake. The asteroid had struck with such violent force that it triggered global earthquakes, some measuring up to 11.2 in magnitude, 50 times more powerful than any recorded in human history. The crust groaned and fractured. Mountains collapsed. Landslides buried entire ecosystems. Volcanoes awakened all over the globe, spewing molten rock, ash, and smoke into the sky. Billions of tons of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and ash shot into the atmosphere. The skies turned darker still, filled with a choking, sulfurous fog. As the tsunami drowned the land and the ground trembled beneath their feet, any surviving dinosaurs faced a new enemy. The air they breathed and the darkness falling around them. And the worst was still to come. The planet was no longer recognizable. What began as a single point of impact had unleashed devastation across every corner of the globe. Now, a new terror surged across the earth. Faster than any storm, hotter than any fire. A death cloud. As volcanoes erupted and the impact crater bled fire and smoke, billions of tons of ash, rock dust, and sulfur gases surged into the atmosphere. This toxic mix didn't just rise, it raced. Friction between particles ignited the cloud, superheating it as it expanded outward. It formed a rolling wall of fire and smoke, a pyroclastic hurricane covering continents. In Central Asia, an old Tarbosaurus limped through a dying forest, unaware that death was seconds away. Though far from ground zero, the shockwaves and earthquakes had already shaken his world. Trees had fallen, water sources had dried, prey was gone, and then, on the horizon, it appeared. A massive black wall, glowing red at its core, sweeping across the land at 18,000 kilometers per hour. It wasn't just hot, it was lethal. The temperature ahead of the cloud soared to 150 degrees Celsius, 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Air itself was on fire. Animals began to drop from heatstroke before the cloud even touched them. The Tarbosaurus tried to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. The firestorm consumed everything. Forests, lakes, cliffs, all vanished beneath the boiling wind. Entire species in all directions were erased. Those that didn't burn would suffocate. For a few lucky or unlucky creatures, refuge was found underground. A few mammals, small reptiles, and insects burrowed deep enough to escape the worst of it. Even our Tarbosaurus, driven by instinct, stumbled into a shallow cave and collapsed in exhaustion. Outside, the sky bled. Acid rain began to fall. Darkness swallowed daylight, and the air turned thick with ash and poison. The inferno had spread, and now, the earth would begin to freeze. The fires faded. The skies, once ablaze with falling rock and choking clouds, began to darken. Not into night, but into something far worse. A thick, global shroud of ash, soot, and sulfuric dust had wrapped itself around the planet like a death veil. The sun vanished. Daylight became a memory, and a new era began, not of fire, but of ice. Impact winter had arrived. With sunlight blocked out, photosynthesis halted. Plants withered. Forests died. The once vibrant, green world turned gray and lifeless. Temperatures plummeted by 28 degrees Celsius in a matter of weeks. Even tropical regions fell below freezing. It was the coldest the Earth had been in tens of millions of years. And then came the rain. From the skies fell acid rain, sulfuric, toxic, and relentless. Poisoned rivers. It destroyed soil, corroded everything it touched. This wasn't just a season. It was a planetary collapse. The Tarbosaurus, once a mighty predator, huddled in his cave. His wounds from the firestorm were healing, but food was gone. The air was thin and stinging. The ground outside was coated in black ash, and for the first time in his life he was truly afraid. After weeks in hiding, hunger forced him to emerge. What he saw was unrecognizable. No birds, no insects, no prey, no rivals. Just a dead forest, a black sky, and silence. He wandered weak, starving, alone, until his body could carry him no farther. Perhaps he was the last dinosaur to walk the earth. And still, the ash continued to fall. Elsewhere, survivors huddled underground. Small mammals, burrowers, creatures who had escaped the fire and braved the cold. For them, a different fate was beginning. But for the great reptiles of Earth, this was the final curtain. The age of dinosaurs was over. The world had gone silent. The forests, once alive with screeches and roars, were now graveyards of ash and bone. The air was thick, the skies black. Snow fell in some places, but it wasn't snow. It was ash, laced with poison, settling on the remains of a kingdom that once ruled the earth. And in this desolation, a lone figure moved. The Tarbosaurus, wounded but defiant, stumbled out of his cave. He had outlasted the inferno. He had escaped the falling glass. He had endured the suffocating dust and acid rain. But he had nothing left to fight for. Each step was slower than the last. His massive frame, once built for crushing bones and conquering prey, now struggled just to stand. His muscles had wasted. His vision had dulled. His breath came in shallow, painful gasps. Around him there were no others. No herbivores to hunt. No predators to challenge. No flocks overhead. No rustle in the trees. Just stillness. He paused at the edge of a dried-up riverbed, where water had once flowed and prey had once gathered. Now it was cracked earth and scattered bones. He let out a low, rasping growl. Not a roar, but an echo. A sound meant for no one. A cry into a world that could no longer answer. And then, slowly, with one final exhale, the great predator collapsed. His bones would fossilize. His legacy, buried in layers of death and dust. Perhaps he was the last dinosaur. Or perhaps, in some corner of the world, a few eggs still remained. Deep underground, untouched by fire or frost. Maybe a few young hatched. Maybe they took their first steps in silence and died just as quickly. But history would record no survivors, only an end. The era of dinosaurs had passed. The darkness did not last forever. Slowly, over years, then decades, the shroud of ash and soot began to lift. Volcanic skies cleared. Sunlight, for the first time in generations, touched the surface of the earth once more. The warmth returned. Ice melted. And the planet exhaled. What emerged was not the same Earth the dinosaurs had known. It was scarred, quiet, and empty, but it was not dead. Nature had only gone dormant, waiting. First came the ferns. Hardy, resilient, they pushed up through the ashen soil. Then the horsetails and mosses followed. Flowering plants, once nurtured by dinosaur footsteps and pollinated by ancient insects, spread again across the land. And slowly, timidly, life returned. But this time, it wasn't the dinosaurs that would reclaim the earth. Their era had ended. The giants were gone. Instead, it was the survivors of the shadows, mammals, who would rise to meet the dawn. Small, clever, and resourceful, they had outlasted the worst extinction event since the dawn of complex life. Some had burrowed deep into the earth. Others had stayed high in the trees. They were warm-blooded, fast-breeding, and able to live on little. And now they were the dominant life forms. Rats, shrews, and tiny primates began to multiply and spread. They found new food sources in the reborn forests, adapted to cold nights and scorching days, and learned to navigate a world that no longer belonged to reptiles. In time, they would evolve into wolves, into whales, into apes, and eventually into us. But none of it would have happened had the dinosaurs survived. The end of one world became the foundation of another. Earth had turned the page. A new chapter had begun. From the ruins of a fallen world, evolution pressed forward. The age of dinosaurs had ended, but life, persistent, adaptive, unstoppable, found new ways to thrive. With the Earth now cleared of its towering reptilian rulers, the stage was set for a bold new cast of characters. Mammals, once relegated to the shadows, now stepped into the light. They spread across the continents, small, scrappy survivors who could regulate their body heat, birth, live young, and live almost anywhere. Over millions of years, these simple creatures diversified. Some took to the trees, others to the grasslands. Some became predators, others became grazers. They grew claws and hooves, tusks and horns. Some returned to the oceans, becoming whales and dolphins. Others took to the skies, evolving into bats. And in one narrow branch of this expanding evolutionary tree, primates emerged. Primates learned to grasp, to communicate, to remember, to imagine. From them came hominids, upright walkers, tool users, fire starters. And eventually, Homo sapiens. We, the modern humans, are the children of survival. We walk a planet reshaped by extinction. We build our civilizations on the bones of giants. And we carry within our DNA the legacy of creatures who ruled long before we stood upright. But even with all our technology and knowledge, one fact remains sobering. Dinosaurs ruled Earth for over 160 million years. Humans? We've been here just a blink, barely 300,000 years. In the vast timeline of Earth's history, we are newcomers, temporary, fragile. The question is not whether we've inherited the Earth. It's whether we'll be wise enough to keep it. The dinosaurs are gone, but they are not forgotten. Their fossils still sleep beneath layers of rock and ash. Their footprints remain etched into ancient stone. Their bones rest in museum halls, studied, reconstructed, honored. And their story continues to captivate us. Not just because they were mighty, but because they remind us of nature's power and fragility. They were the ultimate survivors until they weren't. They adapted through volcanic winters, shifting continents, rising mountains. But in the end, even they could not survive the randomness of the cosmos. A rock from the stars one moment undid 160 million years of evolution. And yet, in a way, dinosaurs never truly disappeared. Their closest living relatives still sing in the trees above us. Birds, feathered descendants of raptors, soar in the skies. The eagle, the sparrow, the hummingbird, all carry the echo of a time when reptiles ruled the world. We call it extinction, but nature calls it transformation. Their fall allowed others to rise. Mammals thrived, humans emerged, and from the ashes of that ancient extinction, a new world was born, ours. But as we look to the stars, explore the cosmos, and build monuments in our name, we must remember the lesson written in the earth itself. No empire is eternal. No species is immune to change. And no one, not even the kings of prehistory, can stop the universe when it decides to turn the page. So we honor them, not just as beasts of the past, but as a reminder that life is fleeting, that survival is earned, and that the earth, our shared home, belongs not to one species but to time itself. The dinosaurs' reign is over, but their story is forever.